The Lives of the Saints by Father Alban Butler, July 16th. Saint Eustathius, Confessor Patriarch of Antioch, A.D. 338. Saint Eustathius was a native of Cida in Pamphylia, and with heroic constancy confessed the faith of Christ before the pagan persecutors, as St. Athanasius assures us, though it does not appear whether this happened under Diocletian or Licinius. He was learned, eloquent, and eminently endowed with all virtue, especially an ardent zeal for the purity of our holy faith. Being made Bishop of Beroea in Syria, he began in that obscure see to be highly considered in the Church, insomuch that St. Alexander of Alexandria wrote to him in particular against Arius and his impious writings in 323. St. Philogonius, Bishop of Antioch, a prelate illustrious for his confession of the faith in the persecution of Licinius, died in 323. One Paulinus succeeded him, but seems a man not equal to the functions of that high station, for during the short time he governed that church, tares began to grow up among the good seed. To root these out, when that dignity became again vacant in 324, the zeal and abilities of St. Eustathius were called for, and he was accordingly translated to this see, in dignity the next to Alexandria, and the third in the world. He vigorously opposed the motion, but was compelled to acquiesce. Indeed, translations of bishops, if made without cogent reasons of necessity, become to many dangerous temptations of ambition and avarice, and open a door to those fatal vices into the sanctuary. To put a bar to this evil, St. Eustathius, in the same year, assisting at the General Council of Nice, zealously concurred with his fellow bishops to forbid, for the time to come, all removals of bishops from one see to another. The new patriarch distinguished himself in that venerable assembly by his zeal against Arianism. Soon after his return to Antioch, he held a council there to unite his church, which he found divided by factions. He was very strict and severe in examining into the characters of those whom he admitted into the clergy, and he constantly rejected all those whose principles, faith, or manners appeared suspected, among whom were several who became afterward ringleaders of Arianism. Amidst his external employs for the service of others, he did not forget that charity must always begin at home, and he labored in the first place to sanctify his own soul. But after watering his own garden, he did not confine the stream there, but let it flow abroad to enrich the neighboring soil, and to dispense plenty and fruitfulness all around. He sent into other dioceses that were subject to his patriarchate men capable of instructing and encouraging the faithful. Eusebius, Archbishop of Caesarea in Palestine, which church was in some measure subject to Antioch, favored the new heresy in such a manner as to alarm the zeal of our saint. This raised a violent storm against him. Eusebius of Nicaea laid a deep plot with his Arian friends to remove St. Eustathius from Antioch, who had attacked Eusebius of Caesarea and accused him of altering the Nicene Creed. Hereupon, Eusebius of Nicaea, pretending a great desire to see the city of Jerusalem, set out in great state, taking with him his confidant Theognis of Nice. At Jerusalem they met Eusebius of Caesarea, Patrophilus of Scythopolis, Aetius of Lydda, Theodotus of Laodicea, and several others, all of the Arian faction, who returned with them to Antioch. There they assembled together, as in a synod in 331, and a debauched woman, whom the Arians had suborned coming in, showed a child which she suckled at her breast, and declared that she had it by Eustathius. The saint protested his innocence, and alleged that the apostle forbids a priest to be condemned, unless convicted by 2 or more witnesses. This woman, before her death, after a long illness, called in a great number of the clergy, and publicly declared to them the innocence of the holy bishop, and confessed that the Arians had given her money for this action, pretending that no perjury was implied in her oath, upon the frivolous and foolish plea that she had the child by a brazier of the city called Eustathius. The Arians accused him also of Sabellianism, as Socrates and others testify, this being their general charge and slander against all who professed the orthodox faith. The Catholic bishops who were present with Eustathius cried out loudly against the injustice of these proceedings, but could not be heard, and the Arians pronounced a sentence of deposition against the saint, and Eusebius of Nicaea and Theognis hastened to inform the Emperor Constantine of these proceedings. The Arian bishops invited Eusebius of Caesarea to exchange his see for the patriarchal chair of Antioch, but he alleged the prohibition of the canons, and the Emperor Constantine commended his modesty by a letter which Eusebius has inserted in his life of that prince. We should have been more edified with his humility had this circumstance been only recorded by others. This happened not in 340, as Baronius and Petavius imagine, but in 330 or 331, as is manifest not only from the testimony of Socrates, Sozomen, Theodoret, and Philostorgius, but also from several circumstances of the affair. The people of Antioch raised a great sedition on this occasion, but the Emperor Constantine, being prepossessed by the slanders of the two bishops, ordered St. Eustathius to repair to Constantinople, and then sent him into banishment. The holy pastor assembled the people before his departure from Antioch, and exhorted them to remain steadfast in the true doctrine, which exhortations were of great weight in preserving many in the Catholic faith. St. Eustathius was banished with several priests and deacons, first into Thrace, as St. Jerome and St. Chrysostom testify, and from thence into Illyricum, as Theodoret adds. Socrates and Sozomen confound him with a priest of Constantinople of the same name, when they tell us he was recalled by Jovian and survived till the year 370, for St. Eustathius died 30 years before St. Meletius was advanced to the see of Antioch in 360, as Theodoret testifies. Nor was he mentioned in the Council of Sardica or in any of the disputes that followed, and our best critics and historians conclude him to have been dead in 337. Philippi in Macedon, which, in the division of the empire into dioceses, was comprised in that of Illyricum, was the place of his death, but his body was interred at Trajanopolis in Thrace, from which city Calandian, one of his successors, caused it to be translated to Antioch, about the year 482, as Theodorus Lector informs us. St. Eustathius bore his exile with patience and perfect submission, and was under its disgraces and hardships greater and more glorious than whilst his zeal and other virtues shone with the brightest luster on the patriarchal throne. We may please ourselves in those actions in which we seem to be something, into which, however, self-love, under 1,000 forms, easily insinuates itself. But the maxims of our divine Redeemer teach us that no circumstances are so happy for the exercise of the most heroic virtue as humiliations and distresses when sent by providence. These put our love to the test, apply the remedy to the very root of our spiritual disorders, employ the most perfect virtues of meekness, forgiveness, and patience, and call forth our resignation, humility, and reliance on providence. In these trials we learn most perfectly to die to our passions, to know ourselves, to feel our own nothingness and miseries, and with St. Paul to take pleasure in our infirmities. Here all virtue is more pure and perfect. A Christian suffering with patience and joy bears in spirit the nearest resemblance to his crucified Master, and enters deepest into his most perfect sentiments of humility, meekness, and love. For Jesus, on his cross, is the model by which his disciples are bound to form themselves, which they nowhere can do with greater advantage than when they are in a like state of desolation and suffering.